Can you hear me now? No.
Yeah, I can't
You
hear you.
you still can't hear me, but we can hear you. Let me just double check that that is in fact true. Yes, it is. Sorry, I was just doing the naughty thing and jumping on my own stream on YouTube in the other window. Hello, Niall. Hello, everybody else who is watching this, whether you are watching us live or whether you are tuning in, catching up later on our website, climateactionlive.show. I'm here for a very special Monday with Niall McEvoy, who's agreed to give us an amended talk to what he normally talks about, which is urban greening, living walls. Now, I'm not going to butcher your introduction. Why don't you kick us off with an introduction, and you can probably do a much better job than my sick mind.
Right, Axel, I haven't heard a word you said, but if you're giving me the thumbs up, I know to start the presentation. Okay, so let's see if this works. Share screen, presentation. I hope this is correct. But first of all, thank you for having me. My name is Niall from Pritchard Pritchard. I know we advertised today that the presentation was going to be exclusively on living walls. Not so much. Although living walls are included, I've also included other elements of green infrastructure. So today, I've broken this presentation into two halves. So the first half deals with why we should include green infrastructure. So within that, we're going to talk a little bit about air pollution, biophilia. We're going to talk about biodiversity, thermal properties, and then I'm going to move on and just show you some of these products. So I've included living walls, green roofs, roadside rain gardens, and so on. If there's any questions, it would be great to hear them, and if we can answer them live, that would be ideal. If not, I'll get back to you as soon as we can. So before I get into the presentation, I'm going to just give a quick 2 minutes of who we are as a business. So Pritchard Pritchard are renowned for being installers of green roofs, but let alone do we install green roofs, we've also been known to install living walls. We're a soft landscaper, and we also carry out maintenance on all of our products. And living walls is the new maintenance division which we have taken apart since September. So when we think about green infrastructure, well, there's going to be many benefits. And some of those benefits could lay as by increasing more green infrastructure within a town or a city, we create more habitats for life to live. We get to reduce the heat island effect. And for those of you who do not know what the heat island effect is, towns and cities are generally warmer than they are in the countryside. And we're going to speak about this during the presentation. Do they act as do any of these methods act as insulation? Is there an insulating property to a living wall? We will discuss that. We're also going to talk about interior air pollution, exterior air pollution, biodiversity, and biophilia. So the real fact is we hinge on what is known as urbanization. We always have. You know, villages grow into towns, towns grow into larger towns, into cities, and so on. And currently today, 50% of the world's population live in the built environment. They reckon by 2050, that's going to increase to 70%. Now, that's an incredible amount of people to have in a very small space. And according to the World Health Organization, 180,000 people per day mobilize from a rural setting into the built environment. And of all our time on this planet, we have built 20 megacities. That is a city of plus 10 million people. They reckon over between now and 2050, we're going to produce another 20 megacities. Now, London is expected to become a megacity. It is expected to grow its population by 2 million people. Now, this is far from a megacity. This was China's Forest City project. It was to house 30,000 people, and it was pegged as the world's first sustainable city. Now, even at a glance at this CGI, we can see that there was no retrofitting of nature here. It was on purpose designed. There's a ratio of nature given over to land. Unfortunately, we don't really get to do that. We don't really get to take a blank canvas of land and start again. What we get to do is we get to retrofit greenery into people's lives. And some of these items I'm going to show you today are ideal because they use up such a small area of space, but can have really important factors on how they can help the built environment grow. Now, when we do it correctly, we want to challenge issues with air pollution. We want to increase the concept of biophilia, and we certainly must increase biodiversity. So on that, let's talk a little bit about air pollution. So I have 4 questions here. Now, obviously, I'm not asking you all to scream out the answers, but maybe you could just pause for just a moment to consider what those answers may be. So the first question, how many people die prematurely in their lives with diseases attributed to air pollution? How many of those people live in London? If you drive a car, over the life expectancy of the car, which is 14 years, how much does your car affect the NHS as a monetary term? And as an average European taxpayer, how much do we pay in additional taxes? Well, the first question, is quite a frightening answer, is that 40,000 people year in, year out, die prematurely in their lives with diseases attributed to air pollution. 9,500 of those live in London. If you drive a vehicle against the NHS, we're looking at £8,000 over the life expectancy of that vehicle. If you drive a diesel, you could probably double that figure, £16,000. And the average European will spend £1,000 more each and every year in additional taxes due to poor air quality. Now, when we speak about air quality, we're going to talk about 2 types. One is a gas and one is a solid. So when we speak about gases, you have nitric oxide, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, and so on. I've got 2 types of plants here. So on the left, I have a broadleaf. So this is a deciduous tree. So they lose their leaves in the wintertime. And on the right, we have an evergreen. Now, generally speaking, a broadleaf tree can remove more gases from the air per day as a percentage as opposed to the evergreen, except they can only do it for 7-8 months of the year. While although the evergreen can do less, it can do it 12 months of the year. So when we think about building a landscape, we want the best broadleaves and the best evergreen plants that kind of create this all year round protection. So what do plants do with gases? Well, they physically ingest them and they become the building blocks for growth. So you could ask the question, where does this tree's biomass come from? Does it get sucked up from the roots, from the ground? Maybe it's when the leaves perform photosynthesis and they convert the sun's energy into sugars. Does that create the biomass? It actually absorbs from the air. The larger the tree you'll see in the landscape, the more carbon it has attenuated. It will sequester about 18%, which becomes timber. The other 83% will be delivered down into the soil where you have rich humus. And we want more trees in the environment, but large, older trees. Once a tree gets about 200 years old, they're really getting into their stride. So we really need more large, mature trees in the landscape. Now, let's say we saw a significant reduction in gases tomorrow. We're still going to be left with another problem, and that's known as particulate matter. So particulate matter, these are microscopic solids present in the air. And whenever we see a PM, it's generally followed by a number, 2.5s, 5s, 10s, 1s, etc. So what do they mean? Well, a PM10 is 10 microns or 10 micrometers in diameter. So to give it scale, if this was a human hair, a PM10 would be 5 than the width of a hair. A PM2.5, these little yellow dots, 20 times smaller than the width of a hair. PM1s are 50 times smaller than the width of a hair. Now, how does that affect us? Well, we've got hairs in our nose, and that's your body's natural line defense. As you breathe in, it's meant to filter air from PM10s. If you blow your nose, you blow out those PMs. PM2.5, that'll navigate your body's natural line defense. That causes premature aging of the lung. PM1s, this is unfortunately where it becomes proper serious. Enters your bloodstream, liver, kidney, heart, brain. It restricts blood flow and creates blood clots. And one of the leading causes of heart attack in the UK today is particulate matter. So I went to see a man called Dr. Ross Cameron of Sheffield University, and he was studying how plants can help fight the good fight against particulate matter. So depending on the method we want to use, so there's the dispersion method and there's the deposition method. So when we think about the deposition method, we physically want the particles to fall on the plants where they could be trapped and held. So in this particular method, the leaf structure is hugely important. So we want very small leaves, but many of them. So if we look at our heather, our pine and our grass, I think those tree plants fall into those characteristics. They've all got many leaves, but they're very small. So let's assume my hand was a leaf. And we have all these little leaves here. You'll have to take my word. There's a speck of dust on the end of my finger. So if we had a very large leaf, air pressure will play its role and it will bounce that particle back. In this particular situation, that's not what we want. We want air to pass through. Now, because these leaves are so small, it's difficult to be deflected, so it will pass through. When it does pass through, we are effectively diffusing the air. We're going to slow everything down. Because if we can slow everything down, we can stick in our companion plants. So I also use this stachie. It's a great example. It's soft, it's hairy, but if you looked at it under a microscope, those hairs aren't straight. They actually have a barb-like structure. So by passing air through one type of plant, our companion plants can trap and hold those particulates on the leaf. So along with having hairy type plants, waxy leaves, or anything which has a stickiness to it. So these are all ideal plants for able to trap and hold particulates. Now let's say we wanted to change the method to control particulate matter. So the dispersion method acts more like a solid barrier. So in this situation, we want a plant with a big, large leaf. And I've used the laurel as an example. So over here, we have this young fella. He's walking to school, and as cars pass up and down, particulates can be blown over to the young kid going to school. So let's start thinking about including a barrier. So here we have some loose shrubs at the base, we have a tree on top, but as you can see, air and wind is always going to find its easiest path, and some particulates will get pushed over. So if we have a larger shrubbed hedge, i.e. a laurel or a griselinia and so on, this is probably the most effective barrier you can create within reason. So particles still can make their way over to our young pedestrian, but the vast majority will either be deflected back onto the road or will be passed directly overhead. Now, when we think about building for the future, we are going to try and align as many benefits into green infrastructure as possible. So there is a thing called a roadside rain garden. So this is when we have like a green verge on the side of the road, but all the drainage points off that road can enter into this green belt. So the roadside rain garden comes in a series of different substrates. And what we want is water to enter this area. It will percolate through all the different levels of substrate before it effectively reaches the drainage point at the base. Now, the reason this is beneficial is it slows down stormwater runoff. So it relieves the pressure on any sewer drains. So this is going to prevent any overflowing in the middle. The reason I bring this up is, if we're looking at these sustainable drainage systems, why not and why shouldn't we include, the concepts of, say, having a large laurel hedge to fight against particulates? Or equally, this could be a biodiversity stretch. So when we think about green infrastructure, it's not that one product or one concept or one method brings one benefit. We can start to think about it logically, and we can put layers of benefit into each and any of these ideas. When it comes in terms of a living wall environment, this is where we want the deposition method. So Scottscape, they modified their living wall system. Now this modification became in the size of the pocket from here to here. This distance is approximately my knuckles to just shy of the elbow. So when they carried out a research wall for particulate matter, they were able to include 9 species of tree, because we want trees involved because of their woody plants, and they're going to attenuate carbon for a long period of time. Now, every other plant on this particular wall was selected because they share desirable traits for trapping and holding particulates. Now, one thing which became apparent afterwards, there was a study done in Birmingham University, or Birmingham New Street Wall, and it recognized that the topography of the wall is hugely important when we want to trap and whole particulants. So having large ins and large outs. So this protrusion of foliage here became hugely beneficial because it trapped a larger volume of air underneath. As air passed through this foliage, obviously turbulence was created, which slowed air down. And again, it was more beneficial for all of these other plants on this particular wall to trap and hold particulates. So when we think about, installing green infrastructure for the better of air quality, we really have to look at the plants themselves and choose the correct plants which share the correct characteristics for trapping and hold particulates. So we can't base everything on aesthetics. Now I'm going to leave this section for now, but what I want you to take away from it is all plants play a job in society. There's universities across the world who are figuring out what this job is, but it's people like yourselves. People like yourselves are going to put these plants in the correct location, whether it's for your own home or from a business point of view, from an architectural point of view. You want to specify all of these plants so the people who occupy these spaces are going to receive the maximum benefit which they can. But if we leave air pollution for just a moment, we could talk a little bit about biophilia. So biophilia is a really old word. Bio means life and philia is the love of. So this relates to our love of nature, to the love of other living organisms. In a nutshell, it makes us feel normal. There was a question asked around the world to 7,600 people. If you could create the perfect workplace, what would you have? And I guarantee you know these answers. But the number one most desirable thing of all people to have from outside to bring inside was natural light. I think it makes sense. Number two, a quiet working space. This actually shifted places with plants. But again, I can value that quiet working space. If anyone who worked at home during the first and second lockdown, maybe little kids running around the place, I think you'll agree we would value that quiet working place where you could actually focus on the task at hand. A view. We cherish the view. We would pay for the view. We pay to go up the Burj Khalifa, the Empire State, the Shard. We have our natural viewing points. We love a view. I'm going to skip plants because this whole presentation is around plants, and I'm going to go straight to bright colors. Now, again, you can see into my lovely kitchen. And most people will choose the same color palette as myself. Quite a muted color palette. You have your whites, your creams, your grays, your beige magnolias, and then we have the feature wall, which may be colorful wallpaper or paint or art or photographs, or you may have a colorful furniture as the uplift. Most people operate like that. And funnily enough, when you're explaining the principles of biophilia, a quiet working space and bright colors tie in extremely well. But we'll get to that in a few moments. Now, when we think about biophilic design, introducing nature or mimicking nature at street level, well, here's some pictures. Where do you think shows biophilic design? So I have one picture here of central Dublin. I have two of central London. See, apparently a city is a hive of life. I would argue that. I would argue that if you could take humans out of the equation, where is all this life? So, is this screaming biophilic design? Or what about here? And ultimately, what is the difference? Let's think about an office space from the 70s and the 80s, as opposed to an office space of today. Vastly different. And where would you want to be? Would you want to be in a bright, airy office that brings in natural light, that incorporates planting, ergonomic tables and chairs, etc.? Or would we rather go back to a stuffy little office, cubicles, those horrible orange lights overhead? Because we have a natural attraction to all these biophilic traits. And when you go from concrete and railings to a public green space, people are 83% more likely to engage with another person in a public green space as opposed to being on the street. Now, Grosvenor Estates carried out a survey on two identical properties. Now, for argument's sake, we'll call it Street A and Street B. Street A had access to trees, shrubs, plants, and nature. Street B did not. Street A will sell for 11.2% more than Street B just because it has access to nature on its doorstep. So we are willing to pay for this. Now we're going to do a little test. Now don't get me wrong, this is far from scientific, but you're trying to get your mind in the same train of thought as myself. I'm going to ask you to stare at the next two pictures, but as you're staring at the next two pictures, imagine you're having an engaging conversation with one of your clients. Which one of these pictures may cause a distraction? So this is number one. If you're having a proper stare at this picture, it's going to upset your ability to work or maybe to focus on another task at hand. Now, equally, if you properly stare at the next picture, where's your attention been drawn to now? Are we still in conversation mode? Or are you questioning, are those lines moving or not? So what do you think about my interior design? See, I would generally ask people now to describe the room on the left. Give me a vibe. Most people say it's busy, gaudy, garish, but the most common word I get is chaotic. But how can it be chaotic? Everything matches. Everything matches. How can it be chaotic? What about rooms, verbs, words on their right? Most people, but the most common word I get is calming. Right, let's explain the room on the left. So, or what's going on, I should say. So as part of your nervous system, well, there's multiple elements, and I'm interested in two. One is known as the sympathetic part of your brain. The other is the parasympathetic. So the sympathetic woke you up this morning, and it controls cognitive function. So memory, speech, knowledge, reason, and it makes you, well, you. The thing is, if we overload the side of your brain, and this is very much, where's my mouse gone? This is very much a visual overload. Let's say we had an acoustic overload. Let's say we had a busy building site working next door, and for the entire presentation, it boom, 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 boom. Or equally with little kids running around the place, or multiple phones going off at the same time. They're all classed as acoustic overloads. I've very much given you a visual overload. But either way, when your body's overloaded, it's going to react. And we call this reaction the fight or flight mode. Once we enter fight or flight, we generally create more stress, and that's your body's natural rejection of certain ideas. So over on the right, most people are in agreement that it's more of a calming vibes. And this is to do with the parasympathetic part of your brain. So this deals with rest and digestion. This is what will put you to sleep at night. This is why we have a little pull down menus on the top of our phone, and we can enter night mode, and it removes the blue wavelength because the blue wavelength upsets the parasympathetic part of your brain. Now, long story short, Terrapin Bright Green over in the States hooked people up to ECG machines to monitor brain waves. And they showed them images of towns and cities looking beautiful, looking maybe not so good, imageries of nature, of pets, and so on. And what they've discovered that when people are exposed to imageries of nature, it satisfied the parasympathetic part of the brain. So therefore, less of the stress hormone was being produced. However, if you could look out the window and you could see it, if you could see a tree or a shrub moving in the wind, brilliant. But if you could walk outside, if you could touch it, you could feel it and experience the space, that was the best for less of the stress hormone being produced. So, we could take, obviously I have a parkland here up on the top left. It's great for everyone to go enjoy. But the other three pictures show very real projects which people could enjoy during their lunch break once they step outside their office, or maybe on a possible walk to their office. And again, you're going to see more biophilia in retail. There's papers written called The Economics of Biophilia, how much more people are willing to spend when we make the area look more beautiful. So if we take the image here on the top right-hand side, we have a block of apartments. Effectively, that is retail, because people aren't just buying a box. They're buying the complete package. They're buying the home. They're buying somewhere where they can see themselves living, and they're willing to pay a premium for this. Now, when we think about biophilia in the workplace, it's shown to increase well-being. Well, effectively, if less of the stress hormone is being produced, we're generally going to feel happier. If we're happier in work, we're generally more productive and more creative. And there's actually statistics around all of this. Absenteeism. The UK taxpayer spends £8 billion each and every year on people being absent from work. So imagine we could just reduce even a fraction of that money. I'm sure we could find something better to spend it on than people being less absent from work. It's shown to decrease noise, decrease stress, and as I said, to increase sales. So there's always that return on investment. By, again, making people happier, you are going to see, increase in sales as productivity in the workplace. So Condell are a team of engineers operate on a global standard. And at the time, they had the only well-certified building in the UK, in Europe, which is 1 Carter Lane across the road from St. Paul's Cathedral. So when Cundell moved from their old office to their new well-certified office, they carried out a little survey. And these are the results which they found. Now, clearly, the first 4 entries there are looking after people's mental health. So surely, if you were looking after people's mental health from a work point of view, that's going to reflect on the business as well. And it did. Because absenteeism was significantly reduced in the first year, Cundell actually saved £90,000. Because staff turnover was also down, they saved an additional £120,000. So that was £210,000 saved by adapting all these philosophies of the well-building standard and biophilia and biophilic design. So the one thing I want you to take away from this section is, like when people think about nature, they may tell you about lions and tigers or trees and flowers and fish and everything else. But very rare people include themselves, because we are an element of nature. And would it not make sense that when our homes, our towns, our cities, our schools, our workplaces, our shops reflect what we are, well, that's when we see the biggest change in the way people act and react in any sort of social situation. Anyway, let's leave that for now, and we'll talk a little bit about biodiversity. So I used to ask the question, I know it's a bee, but I used to ask the question, specifically, what is it? And I've asked this question to many, many people over the years, and only 5 people have ever given me the correct answer. This is a solitary bee, a wild bee. Every country has their own. A solitary bee has pollinated 60 to 70% of everything you've ever eaten in your entire life. It is the most important insect on this planet for our existence. Many people do not even know it exists. The UK has lost 97% of all wildflower meadows since 1930. So in less than 100 years, we've nearly eradicated 100%. Germany has monitored 68 sites, areas of conservation, over the last 36 years, and they have a decline of 76% of all winged insects. Now, where I grew up in Ireland, it was only a small village. It was 3 miles outside a local town. It was literally a 5-minute journey in the car. If we drove in and out on a summer's evening, our windscreen used to be covered in insects. But that doesn't happen anymore, because they call it the windscreen phenomenon. It can't happen anymore. We remove too many habitats, we spray too many pesticides, biodiversity is in a huge decline. Now, it's long overdue, but biodiversity net gain will become low, and this is when a developer must leave the site in at least 10% better off than once they found it. And that may become the inclusion of trees, wildflower meadows, green roofs, or even into living walls. Now, if it is a living wall, maybe we can go one step further than just introducing a living wall per se, but we can really think about the planting which has been included. So when these plants were selected, these are all native and naturalized ornamental plants. And when I selected this, the planted up this wall, we selected some plants for winter, some for spring, some for summer, and some for autumn. And the logic was behind that we want a minimum of 1 species in flower 365 days of the year, which is able to produce pollen. If you have some adventurous clients, maybe go full on native wildflower. So when we planted this wall, I had a meter cube of compost mixed in with native wildflower mix. And I took handfuls of soil, filled up all the pockets. And we weren't really sure what it was going to look like at the end. We hung it for 3 to 4 months, and this was the result. And the reason I know this works from a biodiversity point of view, well, we found a frog. See, we put in the correct source, the source being the plants, and that attracts the insects. Once we attract the insects, we attract the predators. We have the birds, the bats, and apparently the frogs. We should also bring about more trees. And again, maybe an ecologist or a local ecologist maybe give more assistance on this. But by choosing the correct trees in the correct locations, we can support an incredible amount of life. So again, rather than just trying to install trees for aesthetic purposes, maybe we can go that one step further and look at trees specific for those given areas, which are going to bring as much life to these areas as humanly possible. Now, when we do introduce bees, I would strongly advise that you speak to a beekeeper before any hives get introduced. So many people do include or introduce bees into the built environment to create hives. And by all accounts, they really believe that they're doing excellent work. The problem is you are now introducing competition into an already starved landscape. To start to increase bees, we should think about maybe more of a natural by introducing more habitats for bees to feed on. Now, if you must introduce bees on any given area, please speak with an ecologist or a beekeeper who knows the topic inside out and can give correct advice whether this should be introduced or not. If you're looking at insect and wildlife habitats, you do have many options, and I'm not here to say what you should and shouldn't do, but just to let you know, there are companies here based in the UK which sustainably grow all of their timber. Certain insects like certain timber. Companies like Green Earth Habitats, they will build those habitats specific for those particular insects. So we know they're actually going to get used rather than they, just being there for aesthetic value. And the good thing about these particular insect habitats is they will last. You could look at a good 20 to 30 years lifespan because they're actually really well made from a sustainable source. I'm trying to shoehorn this one in because I couldn't find where else in the presentation to put it. But I want to talk very briefly about the urban heat island effect. So as I said earlier, towns and cities are generally warmer than they are in the countryside, maybe by 4 or 5 degrees. Now, the reason they are is because, well, a town and a city has so many hard surfaces that when the sun shines down, the brickworks can absorb all that sun's radiation and at nighttime can radiate that heat back out. Now, equally, our buildings produce heat, our cars produce heat. In a building, we try to keep ourselves cool, so we'll increase air conditioning, and as a result, we'll pump more hot air into the built environment. I found one study done in the States. I said that if you had a building completely enveloped in green, so 4 sides with a living wall and a green roof on top, it could lead, from an air conditioning point of view, is a 84% reduction in the cooling demand. Now, the heat island effect also has another heat island effect. A green roof and planting also has another trick up its sleeve. It's called evapotranspiration. So as plants draw in air, carbon dioxide, to produce oxygen. Obviously, that air comes in warmer. By the processes of transpiration, water vapor is also produced, and the air is a little bit cooler. Now, if you had a solar panel installed on top of a green roof, those solar panels are going to work far more efficiently, and you're going to have a larger lifespan. If air conditioning vents were placed on a green roof, because the air temperature is just maybe 1 or 2 degrees cooler than it would normally be, it makes those air conditioning units run far more effectively. Now, back in 2012, Sheffield University done a study with Scottscape about the various living wall systems available on the market. So we looked at Treebox, ANS, Biotexture. I know you can't really see it, but we have an ivy screen and a wire trellis system. Now, there was sensors put on the plants, on the brickwork, and behind the living wall, and it was also done above as a control measure. So we measured temperature, humidity, evaporation, transpiration, etc., etc. Now, due to the heat island effect on the brickwork, we received a temperature of 45 degrees Celsius. Behind the wall, it was 20 degrees. So the living wall could deflect 25 degrees worth of surface temperature off the facade of the building. On a cold winter's evening, it didn't retain the heat by 25 degrees, but it did actually retain the heat. The problem was, in the real world, it became far more difficult to quantify. So with this particular living wall system here, with Scottscape, the architects specified the installation. So this was included as part of the living wall installation. Now you can see the living wall subframe. This black line is, where's my mouse? My mouse is gone. We can see the living wall modules, and this is what site was left looking like. So this living wall here does have a quantifiable U value. It is based on the insulation which the architect specified, but there is also an additional bonus provided by the plants and the living wall system itself. So when we speak about living walls, there are many systems available on the market. Now, obviously, I can't show and speak to you about each and every one, but many of them share the same traits. Now, when it comes to construction, this is the construction process of the phytotextile living wall system. As I said, many of the systems will follow the same philosophies. Number one, a subframe is installed. So a subframe is installed because it allows a little air gap between the living wall and the building itself. So it allows air movement, so no damp can transfer from the living wall to the building itself. It also it just allows airflow. Or no, rainfall, if rainfall fed, it doesn't get stuck behind the living wall, so it's not able to absorb into the building itself. So with all the living wall systems available on the market, their subframes may look slightly different, but they all have them and they all carry out the same tasks. So at the base of every living wall which you will operate with, there's generally a drainage channel at the base or a gutter. So if we're going to be slightly elevated, we will need a drainage point so we can drop our downpipe into. If we're going to be working over a grassy area, we can literally let the water go out into a flower bed and so on. So graphic number 3, there's a little hanging rail attached to the top of the horizontal and the living wall module is slid into place. Once all the living wall modules are slid into place, we can secure them left, the middle and to the right with screws so everything is pinned down. We do need an irrigation and all living wall systems will come with an irrigation system of some description. And finally, we're able to plant it up until you have a nice living wall. Now, contrary to what I've just said, there's 2 living wall systems which are slightly different than the other. One is known as Plant Box and the second is Mobilane's Live Panel. The reason I've selected both of these is, well, they both come with their own reservoirs. So on each living wall module, there's a small reservoir at the base. And in each of these planted pockets, there's a small wick which drops from the soil right down into the water. So once these reservoirs are topped up, and this could be done manually, or we could do it automatically with a pump and tank system, just to keep the reservoirs full, the wick will then draw the water up to the soil is damp, and then the plants, well, they can happily grow. Now, depending on the system which you are using, well, as you can see, the range in weights can vary dramatically. So some of the lighter ones in the market are around 40 kilograms, but maybe some of the heavier ones are up to about 72 kilograms per square meter. This is including the subframe, the living wall module, and all the plants. And these figures are taken when the modules are wet. So depending on the structure which you are looking to green, if we're dealing with a masonry building, you know, I'm sure these weight loadings won't take an issue. But if you're looking to maybe green up the side of a timber fence or a gateway, maybe you may have to look at some of the more lighter options. Now, let's say you do want a living wall, but a modular living wall system isn't exactly what you're after. Well, we can use a trellis. Well, everyone knows what a trellis is. They've been around for many years, but the more updated version is a stainless steel wire trellis. So as you can see here in the first picture, there's fixings attached to the wall. We can then thread our stainless steel ropes and we can pull a tension on those. Now, generally we'd allow a climbing plant in and they can climb their way up the entire structure. Now, of course, if we get creative, you can actually form these into very creative designs to create the aesthetic which you wish. But ultimately, it's the same principle. We're creating a wire frame to allow climbing plants to grow. Now, where are these climbing plants going to sit? Well, ideally, they'll have to be either planted into the ground or planted into a planter. And then if they are into a planter, make sure to choose a suitable planter which can accommodate a root system for some of the larger growing species. A green roof. A green roof is absolutely nothing new. They've been around for thousands of years, but maybe thousands of years ago it was based out on necessity. Well, maybe thousands of years later it's coming back to necessity. So when we think about a green roof, what we're ultimately trying to do is we're trying to mimic nature. So we're going to have our vegetation on a thin layer of humus, which is going to be on a very porous, well, as you can see in the top left-hand side, rock. So when we're trying to make a green roof system, we're trying to mimic nature. So on the first layer, we're going to have vegetation. This is going to be followed by a growing medium or a substrate. Do not use soil. If there's anybody budding DIY green roof enthusiasts, don't use soil. Soil will become too heavy, it will clog up, the plants ultimately won't be happy. It has to be extremely free draining. As I said, we're trying to mimic nature. We're going to have a filter layer. This is just to separate the substrate from mixing with the drainage layer. So within this drainage layer, we have, as you can see, it looks like an egg carton. But basically all of these fill with water, and as they heat up, the water rises and it can make the growing medium damp. When rain falls, all water can be trapped in the drainage layer. We have a protection layer from the roof, and finally the roof itself. So when we think about a green roof, well, there's many different variations, and here are probably the three more popular. So an extensive green roof, a sedum, which is probably the most important. We have semi-extensive green roof or a wildflower roof, and we have an intensive green roof. So a sedum roof. Sedum roofs typically about 100 millimeters. Now this is where you want to be. You will come across companies or people who've installed them with less millimeters. You may be 50, 60, but to be honest, I've never seen them being truly successful. So the grow code would say about 100 millimeters. Now that's going to give you a weight loading of around 100 to 120 kilograms per square meter. So if you want to do a green roof, or even if you want to do one at home, please be sure that your roof can actually take this additional weight. So we generally then roll out a carpet, and that carpet could be impregnated with many, many different species. And we try to include as many as possible, because not all of these species will actually work in this given environment. A handful will become dominant and they will spread themselves over the entire area. The most common piece of maintenance is literally pulling weeds, and generally about once a year you might put out some slow release fertilizer just to help everything grow. If we had one area which was patchy, we can take cuttings from other areas of the green roof that could be incorporated into the substrate, and then it'll fill in any gaps. Now a sedum roof, for any of you who may be working on a grade 2 listed building, a sedum roof which has below the parapet is probably one of the few pieces of green infrastructure which is likely to gain planning permission. Now it's not a definite, but it is likely to gain planning permission. Now access isn't strictly necessary for a sedum roof, because where they naturally grow, they're succulent plants, they can absorb water and hold them for a long period of time. However, if we do have an area of drought, and if you could put the hose over to give it a sprinkle of water, the plants will truly benefit. So they don't have to survive when we can give them a little bit of water and they can actually thrive in that given space. Now another area is a biodiverse green roof, and this is where I'll be pushing more people to install as opposed to sedum. Now with a biodiverse green roof, we're going to have a much deeper substrate, because we have a different plant, and these plants have a deeper root system. Now the weight loadings on these can range from 120 to 155 kilograms per square meter, and I would absolutely advise that an irrigation system is installed with these particular setups, because as I said, stronger root system, they're not going to retain as much water as opposed to the sedum will, so we do want to be able to keep these irrigated for long-term success. Now you could also include piles of logs, piles of sticks, piles of rubble, piles of sand, because insects will make their homes in these areas. Now my advice, put them in the sunniest location possible on that given roof, because therefore we're going to ensure that these actually get used as they should do. Now these roofs aren't designed for foot traffic, but if we are going to use these as an amenity space, I'd recommend that a little footpath could be designed through that particular green roof. So again, we're not going to trample on all the foliage. Podiums and roof gardens. So this is more like your regular landscape garden, but ideally it's on a roof. Now, typical build up, it could range, as I said, from 100 mil all the way up to maybe 400 or 500 mil, depending what type of plant we're actually putting on that given area. And weight loading, I know I've put down 365 kilograms a square meter, but again, that's subjective what's actually being supported by the roof itself. And the reason I like these is because it can be enjoyed as an amenity space, because as land becomes so valuable in the built environment, we have to use what's free and accessible. So our walls, we can put living walls, but our roofs, they should become amenity spaces where people go up and enjoy and have their gardens in that given space. And something we're really keen to do with Pritchard and Pritchard is, rather than install a regular green roof, we want to install an urban farm. And ideally, it would be nice to be able to do it on a residential tower block, so the people who occupy that building could actually use that as an amenity space, as a social space, but they can grow their own vegetables, they can bring in all those biophilic effects, increase biodiversity, and again help sequester air pollution. Now, some of you may not have heard of a blue roof, and what does a blue roof look like? The first time I heard of a blue roof, I literally thought it was a pond on the top of a roof, but that is not it. A blue roof could look very similar to a green roof, or the wildflower roofs, or the podiums. Once it could look, they do look identical to all of these items. Now, the difference is that rather than water passing through the system and then finding its way to the drain, there's a big, basically the roof becomes a huge catchment tank. It stores all the water, and we have a little valve, and that valve can be set to what's known as the Greenfield rate. So after we had a heavy storm, water will want to find its drain. And when it does, there's a good chance that we're going to have a spill event. Now, in 2020, as I said, Thames Water experienced 18,000 spill events, and that totaled 215,000 250,000 hours for an environmental agency to rectify this issue. So sustainable drainage is hugely important because it slowly releases water back down into the drain without causing the risk for flood. Now, we installed the largest blue roof in London, which is Plough Lane in Wimbledon. It was 14,000 square meters. There was 26 green roofs and 4 landscape podiums. And in 2015, there was local government guidelines that says that a property more than 12 dwellings should have a sustainable drainage system. Now, as you can see here on the Sedum roofs, they've also included solar panels, because we know evapotranspiration, that's going to make those solar panels work more efficiently. And all the other plants, the wildflowers and the grasses, etc., these were all native and naturalized to the UK. Now, I really do like this system because it's maximizing all the best elements of the green roof. It's put to very intelligent uses, and downstairs the podium gardens then to become an amenity space for the people who live and occupy in these buildings. So irrigation systems. So irrigation systems will vary depending if you're a private domestic or if you're a commercial building. So when we're dealing with a commercial building, the water regulations state that we must have a tank of water. Basically, it's called a Category 5 break tank, and there's a little air gap between where water enters the tank and where water leaves. So when water leaves the tank, and again, my mouse has disappeared, it's going to pass this little green guy on the right-hand side. That's known as a dosatron. When water passes through the dosatron, it's going to suck up plant food, give it a mix, and it's going to send it out to these valves. And as you can see, these valves control different areas of the living wall, or it could be of the green roof, or the planters, or whatever it may be. But if we can pick up a Wi-Fi connection for the irrigation system, we can install a smart controller, and therefore we could log in remotely and we could see when it ran, we can shut it off, we could increase it, decrease it, etc., etc. And this is what it could look like in the real world. Now, if you're dealing with a private domestic, chances are we could use a tap timer. I have tap timers at home. It helps keep my garden moist. But as you can see, this tap timer only has 2 outlets. If you want to have many outlets but still use a mains pressure, as you can see here on the right hand side, we could use a full manifold set full of solenoids with a controller attached. Now, that's a battery operated controller as well. Now, if it's a living wall you're talking about, yes, mains pressure is suitable from a private domestic point of view. However, if you need to push vertical, well, it would ultimately depend on how tall and how wide that living wall is, because mains pressure might not actually be able to do it. And in that case, you may need a small pump and tank system just to physically be able to drive the water where it needs to be. But if we're just talking about purely horizontal, again, mains pressure might be enough for general gardening, but for more commercial sites, I would imagine a full pump and tank system must be required. Now, finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about light. Now, this is more relating to interior projects. So first of all, light is an incredibly large wavelength. On the broad side, we've got TV, radio, radar, etc. On the short, we've got ultraviolet and X-ray. But what we see is known as the visible spectrum, and it ranges between 400 to 700 nanometers. Now here, on the right, we can see how the human eye ranges between 400 to 750, and we peak about 600. But what a plant requires is known as PAR light. This stands for photosynthetical active radiation. So this is a much broader spectrum, taking in all the colors, and it allows plants to photosynthesize. Now, I'm right beside a window. This is a north face window, and I'm in a basement flat. If I went outside to the front, so south facing on a bright blue sky summer's day, and I took out a light meter to take a power reading, it's going to give me an answer in called ppfd, and it's probably going to read about 1,200 ppfd. If I, on the same day, if I went to the rear, the north face window, and took the same reading, at this window, I would probably get a reading of about 20 ppfd. So 1,200 at the front, I've got about 20 ppfd at the rear. Now, if I step back in another meter or two from this window, I'll probably have a ppfd of about 1.5. So light levels can drop off tremendously fast. Now, when we done experiments in work, the lowest I saw a plant survive on, an interior plant, was 7 ppfd, which is incredibly small. Now, this plant wasn't growing, it was just living, it was in stasis. So that's not really what we want. So maybe if you're looking at a project, maybe a sunlight study needs to be done, so we can see all the different light levels and how they're going to affect your property. Equally, if you had skylights, sunlights, light wells, you can see how the sunlight will pass over your property, over the light well, and how it can affect the plants down below. If you know automatically that your room is going to be too dark and you want to include, i.e. a living wall, from the plans, we can design a full lighting system which project all the color temperatures, the ppfd levels down onto that particular wall, and then all the plants can be chosen accordingly. And once all of this design work has been done, all this information could be sent over to the architects. It could be sent over to site to allow all the electricians to literally just install these lights on a timer switch. Now, the most common form of grow lighting is normally track lighting, and there's normally on average setback from the living wall about 1.5 meters. With interior plants, it depends on the plants themselves. I know this living wall is an interior plant, but a regular potted plant, many of the potted plants which we use are generally low light levels regardless, and that's why we don't see a huge adventurous schemes across the UK. But if we want to go for that little bit more of an adventurous look, I would absolutely think about including grow lights. Now, that concludes my talk, and the reason we do what we do and why we do is that someday we all get to roll out a green world which we can enjoy. So if we've any questions on any of that, I'd love to hear it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Now, I'm not sure you can hear me. We seem to be having some trouble with the audio. I don't have any questions in the chat, so there'll be no Q&A right now. But if you're watching this on catch up on our website, please do leave us a comment or get in touch using the email address.
Here. Axel.
Okay, I'm just putting it in the internal chat. Apologies, and thank you for your patience with us today. But yeah, catch us on the website. Leave us a comment on the channels, and I think Niall might be able to hear me now.
I am back. I can hear you.
You're
now.
back. Yes. Just as we're wrapping up No, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on again, and thank you so much. There are so many things in your talk that have almost blown me off my chair today. There's so much food for thought, and I, for one, would love to come back to you with some specific stuff. Hopefully we can do something through the town council that I'm on. Hopefully, if you're watching and you're in local politics, get in touch. Details are on the website. And otherwise, yes, just reach out by email or on social media. Leave us a comment. And yeah, let me just wrap this up by saying now, thank you very much. Have a lovely rest of your day or evening, what's left of it. And just a quick heads up, there will be no live show in August because it's the summer holidays, and I'm actually trying to get away from this island for a few weeks. But I've got a pre-recorded live show with some very special guests to show you on the first Monday of August. Until September, you've been fantastic. See you later. Bye-bye.